Our children need to see themselves in a much more positive light, to see that nothing is impossible when they try with all their might. We must build the schools that will teach them that they're children of kings and queens. It's up to us to save them. Let us work and build and sing. You know it's time to stand like a people. You know it's time to stand like a people today. It's time to stand like a people. Stand up and say, no more wondering, we are finally on our way. Habaragani, Wahotase, Kedu, Nagadif. What's up, my netters? It's Papa Alkebulan again, and thank you for allowing me to come into your computer, your personal devices, to give you a little history. And today we're going to talk about creativity today. That song that I just did was composed by the co-founder of Wose Community Church, Reverend William E. Calhoun. William E. Calhoun, along with Minister Makalisi Oso Sawandi, formerly known as Timothy Soul, were ministers in training at Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland. It's one of the largest black Baptist churches in the Bay Area. And as they were ministers in training, they began to study the book Destruction of Black Civilization by Dr. Chancellor Williams. And they, after reading that book, they came together and decided to form Wose Community Church. And December 7th, 1980, was the first public worship service of Wose Community Church. Now, Reverend Calhoun was a minister of music, or part of a musical arm of the Black Panther Party. So he already had that ability when he came to Wose. And Minister Makalisi, when he was going to Merritt College, he was a journalist major. And so we had an information arm called Zamani Newspaper. So I said all that because Minister Calhoun wrote that song. Now that song is to the tune, "It's Time to Come to the Altar and Pray." And if you're from the Bay Area, you will probably have listened to radio station KDIA. And on Sundays, it was this minister from St. John's called, now his name is escaping me, but he was known as the singing minister. And they would sing, "It's time to come to the altar and pray." So Minister Calhoun rewrote the words to that song. It's time to stand like a people today. No more wondering, we are finally on our way. And then the second verse says, it was Reverend Carl Anderson. The second verse is, our children need to see themselves in a much more positive light, to see that nothing is impossible when they try with all their might. We must build the schools that will teach them that they're children of kings and queens. It's up to us to save them. Let's work and build and sing. And then we go into the chorus. And so this program today is about our creativity. Our creativity. I tend to view things through what the Honorable Marcus Messiah Garvey advises, through the spectacles of Ethiopia. Politically, I'm a Pan-Africanist, which means I'm for the total liberation of the African continent from all oppression and all oppressors. I believe in Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad. Spiritually, I practice Mot. Mot is a Kemetic term which means truth, justice, righteousness, propriety, harmony, balance, and reciprocity. There's 7 things related to Mot. So truth, Mot manifests itself in the individual as truth. Mot manifests itself in the society as justice. Mot manifests itself in a nature as the normalcy of phenomenon, i.e., the sun rises in the morning, sets in the evening. Mot is the law that's governing the movement of the sun, moon, and stars and the universe. It's so accurate, it's so precise, that you can calculate 10,000 years from now what time the sun is going to rise and set on a particular day. So that is my spiritual philosophy. I am a spiritual being. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. I seek liberation to know fully, experientially, the source of my creation. Being that I was born as an African living in America, I am epistemologically, self-consciously black. Let me say that again. I am epistemologically, self-consciously black. I'm African-centered. I had a chance to do a panel discussion years ago with a minister by the name of Reverend Eugene Callender. And he was from New York. He was the pastor of a Church of the Master in Harlem. And I heard him say, I'm epistemologically, self-consciously black. And I've stayed with that ever since. And so just to give you a little, epistemologically. Epistemologically is help me out, Earth Mother.
Okay. Epistemologically?
Yeah, thank
Ooh,
you.
You gotta sound that like
Epistemologically is a branch of philosophy that studies knowledge. It's a branch of philosophy that's concerned with nature and the scope and limitations of knowledge. It attempts to answer the basic question, what distinguishes true, adequate knowledge from false, inadequate knowledge? How knowledge relates to truth, belief, and justification. That the means of production of knowledge, skepticism about different knowledge claims. So that's kind of like a textbook definition of it. But really, I'm African through and through in my mind, in my manners, how I relate to people. By the way, that doesn't mean that I hate white people or any other people. I relate to people the way that they relate to me. If they're all right with me, then if they're all right, then they're all right with me. If they're not all right with me, then they're not all right. I count among my friends individuals from various ethnicities, religious and other persuasions. So I don't just necessarily, I'm not necessarily against a person because they're a particular way. I get to know them first, and if our vibes blend together, then we can proceed. If not, then we don't. Of course, I have to always relate to my grandmother's teaching, which says you don't really know your friends until you need them. Mm. That's a mother wit from Nancy Everline Parkinson. But yet I'm able to say without apology that I'm epistemologically, self-consciously black. I may be African-centered or Afro-centered as coined by Malefia Santi, but I strive not to be Afro-silly. So with that being said, I know that's a long introduction, but I went to the movies Monday night to see Current Wars. And I went to see it because I thought it was about Nikola Tesla. Now, those of you that have been watching my programs know that I kind of have an affinity for Nikola Tesla. The history of Nikola Tesla is fascinating to me. He's responsible for many of the devices that we use today in modern life but he has been unscrupulously erased from the minds of the general public. So Nikola Tesla gives us alternating current as opposed to direct current. He was able to light up a World's Expo in Chicago and kind of dispel the use of direct current. He gives us light itself. No, he didn't invent light, but the way that light is transmitted today, it would not be possible if it were not for Nikola Tesla. Now, Nikola Tesla's not an African. He is a man from Croatia that immigrated to this country, but he was a brilliant man who could conceive devices and inventions, clearly in his head, in his imagination, and put them down on paper and able to construct them. He gives us the X-ray, the radio, remote control. He gives us the electric motor. Now, there's a company out now called Tesla Motors. They're taking things after him, but they really don't have it as correct and precise as he does. And let's just back up for a minute. California is experiencing an energy crisis through PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric. But if we would go Tesla's way, and this is why I believe he's been erased from history, because Tesla had designed a tower, and he was being funded by J.P. Morgan to give electricity to the world wirelessly for free. Just think about that. So you wouldn't have to worry about trees burning down and you wouldn't need to worry about the winds. So that's how brilliant this man was. So that's why I was going, looking for the movie. Introduce robotics. So Tesla is a brilliant man. No question about it. But when I went to the movie Current Wars, it was more about the disputes between Edison and Westinghouse over the way electricity was distributed. It was alternating current versus direct current debate. Alternating current has its advantages over direct current, but inventors such as Edison were using it first, and they didn't want to change the technology. They thought it was best, and they could get more money from it. But ultimately, Tesla's ideas and designs prevailed. Don't want to get too much into the weeds and the plot of the movie, but I invite you to read up on Tesla. You can do a search on Tesla, Nikola Tesla, and this is a really good documentary on him. It's a PBS documentary that came out in the year 2000. It's entitled Tesla, Master of Lightning. Now, just for a review, for a couple of sessions ago, Dr. Asa Hilliard taught us that an African-centered education should show you the following: that there's a cultural unity among the peoples of Africa. It should show you the impact of Africa on other cultures, particularly the Greek and Roman cultures, but other cultures as well. We should talk about our Holocaust or our Maafa story. Maafa is a Kiswahili word that means disaster or terrible occurrence. Dr. Mariam Ani uses it to describe our tragedy, our disaster, our terrible occurrence in the Middle Passage. But even coming from the interior of Africa to the shores of Africa, that was a treacherous journey that a lot of people died just getting to the slave dungeons. So that's what we need to talk about. We need to know about it. We need to analyze it. We need to talk about our story of resistance, that we just did not accept servitude, that we did not accept slavery. We did not just sing songs and play banjos and thought everything was cool. We need to talk about our creativity, story of our creativity. We need to look, and even though the song says we need to teach our children that they're children of kings and queens, but we need to focus more on people history rather than kings and queens, because kings and queens is what's got us here. You know, relying on individuals. And we kind of still do it with our pastors, some of us, not everybody, with our pastors in church. All right. And then we must know the story of the story. See, as African people, we have a story before the story. Our scientists, our spiritualists analyzed the creation before creation. So we need to know the story of the story. And then he kind of concludes, he says, no African story that plays off the European story. That we have our own story. So I want to focus on, out of that list, I want to focus on today on our creativity. But before I do that, while watching the movie, I recognized some familiar faces on the screen. So there was Benedict Cumberbatch. He played Edison. Now, he played Khan in Star Trek and Doctor Strange in the Marvel movies. There was Michael Shannon. He played George Westinghouse, and he played General Zod in the latest Superman. Nicholas Hoult plays Nikola Tesla. He played Beast in X-Men. So we had some major actors in this movie. Catherine Waterston. She played George Westinghouse's wife. But she was also in that movie Fantastic Beasts. She was Newt's girlfriend. And then Tom Holland, who played Edison's assistant, he's the new Spider-Man. So we had some major stars in this movie. It was a very well done production. It was done originally by Martin Scorsese, and then it got tabled through all that Harvey Weinstein stuff, and then somebody else came and said, "Hey, can we delete a couple of scenes?" And they released the movie, just a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a week ago. But as I watched that movie, and as I was looking through the spectacles of Ethiopia, asking myself, where are we in this story? My mind reflected back to two great men that were part of this period, who made it possible for this period to go on. And so that's why I think we need to talk about this. We need to teach our children about this. We need to teach our adults, because our adults don't even know. So the two people that I think we need to focus on related to the current wars is, one, Granville T. Woods, and two, Lewis Latimer. Granville T. Woods, Lewis Latimer. Now this is Granville T. Woods. He looks just like any brother from the continent or from here. And this is a man who only went up to school till he was 10 years old, but taught himself electricity. I'm going to talk about him. And so here he is, artist conception, Granville T. Woods. And then the other person is, people sure dressed cool back then. Mm-hmm. He's got his ascot on, horn-rimmed glasses. This is Lewis Latimer. If it were not for Lewis Latimer, we would not have the light bulb as we know it today. So, and then here's a later picture of him, Lewis Latimer. So now, and this is the drawing that he submitted for the light bulb. So, you know, you don't have to be a gangbanger. You don't have to be a basketballer. You don't have to be a singer. You could be a scientist. You could be a mathematician. You could be an inventor. So, now when I was watching the movie, there were like 3 black people in the whole movie. You know, and one time I saw Minister Farrakhan speak at the East Oakland Youth Development Center. And East Oakland Youth Development Center is on East 14th. Well, it's not called East 14th anymore. It's called New International Way. Yeah. And I think it's around like 82nd, 86th, and East 14th. And it's a center right in, you know, a major African-American neighborhood. And there were like, it had to have been like 400 or 500 people there. And there was like some gangbangers that was there. And as Minister Farrakhan talked, and you know, Minister Farrakhan can talk for hours and not get tired. He could talk for like 2-3 hours and not get tired. And it'll be interesting. And so at one point during the lecture, he said, look at these young gangbangers that are sitting here, you know, in front, and they have not moved a muscle. They have paid close attention to what I said. And he said, why is that? He says, because they see themselves in what I am saying. He says, if I was able to take a picture, this is before cell phones and digital cameras. He says, if I was to take a picture of this vast audience and reproduce it for yourself, and reproduce it for you, whose picture would you look for first? And the answer to that is your own. And this is why many times our children are disinterested in school, because they cannot see themselves in mathematics, in science, even in English or literature or any of the fields, the subjects that are in school. We have been unscrupulously removed. So when I watched that movie, I only saw 3 black people. There was one, he was among the servants at a grand table, but he was dressed sharp. And then there was a reporter who I recognize him from being in the movie Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban. And, you know, he didn't have really like a speaking role. He was like a reporter. He was taking pictures. And then the last one that I saw, he possibly could be Lewis Latimer. He had like a vague line in the movie. Now, you may be saying, well, okay, they make their movies, so they're under no obligation to include us. And you're absolutely right. Babylon is not required to portray African people in a positive light. They have a massive movie industry, but you and I only have the truth. And so I'm thankful today for programs such as Earth Mama Healing that allows me to speak this truth, and hopefully some youth, some person will be able to go and do further research on Granville T. Woods and Lewis Latimer. So Lewis Latimer, he's been misnomered as the Black Edison, which, okay, I hate that definition of him, because Edison tried to steal some of his patents. And you know what, sisters and brothers? He beat Edison in court. So he was born in 1856 in Columbus, Ohio, and he dedicated his life to developing a variety of inventions related to the railroad industry. Um, he um, he developed a system where you didn't need Morse code to use, and I think about that because you know Morse code requires a specialized skill. You have to study Morse code and then be able to use it. But he devised a system where you could speak to close to the wire, and your voice would transfer across the wire. So you didn't need a specialized operator to use that. And this was kind of revolutionary in the sense because that was one of the major forms of transportation, railroad. And so a person at the front office could communicate, hey, a tree is down on such and such a track, slow down. So all of his inventions, or a lot of his inventions, were related to railroad telephony. That particular one is railroad telegraphy. He only went to school, like I said, to the age of 10, and during his youth, he went to night school and private lessons. Some of us, we don't want to go to school now. We think it's too hard to get up in the morning and just go to school. Just think of the things that our ancestors had to go through, but he was determined. He didn't have any formal education. He got a job as a fireman, and then he became an engineer on a railroad in Missouri. He invested his spare time just studying electronics. And in 1874, he worked in a mill. He took a job on the Ironsides, which was a British steamer. And within 2 years, he became the chief engineer of that steamer. So, he was a person that was, pull yourself up by your bootstrap. He probably didn't even have any boots. In 1888, he developed a system of overhead electric conducting lines for railroads, which aided in the development of the overhead railroad system found in cities such as Chicago, St. Louis, and New York. So just think about that. You see that now, the overhead railroad, the overhead rails on streetcars, right here in Sacramento. The light rail, part of it is overhead rail. These are from the creations, from the minds of this African American, denied so many opportunities, but he was able to bring these inventions forth. He did so many things as an inventor, but one of the things that he also invented was the thermostat. His application was for hatching chickens. So you might have seen, like when they, to hatch eggs, they make it warm in there so it appears like the mother is sitting on the eggs and makes it warm so that eggs can hatch. He gives us what's called the third rail. The third rail, for trains. So like I'm from the Bay Area, BART uses third rail. The subways and the metro in Washington D.C., etc. These have their antecedents on the drawing board and drawing table of Granville T. Woods. So now I'm going to move on, and you can just do a search on him. I found some of the information in a biography of Granville T. Woods at MIT Inventor of the Week website. And now I see Henry Louis Gates is mentioned. I have to say, I do not like Henry Louis Gates Jr. Because he made this documentary on Africa, and he started out by saying that the ancient Egyptians weren't black. He said that there was no evidence of that. And then he went along the coast of Kenya and just asked people out on the street their origin. And so a lot of them are confused by Islam and claim to be Persian, black as the ace of spades, straight African, but they were claiming Persians. He didn't check with scholars. There's scholars that they could have used. He went to, I know I'm going on a tangent, but this man really has done a lot of damage. And there was this scholar, his name was Ali Mazuri from Kenya. And when he saw the documentary, he wrote about it in this way. He said, "I was relieved that it was merely disrespectful." So, because he went to the brothers or the priests in Ethiopia where they claimed to have the Ark of Covenant. And he was joking. He was there in his flip-flops. Is it there? Let me see it, playing games. He went to the west coast of Africa and absolved Europeans for the slave trade. So, and then he still didn't get it when he was arrested at his house. You remember that when Barack Obama was elected president, he had forgot his keys, and so he came in through the side window or back door of his house, and somebody reported him. Police came, and he wanted to impress people that he was Dr. So-and-so. And so he didn't even have the mother wit that a lot of youth have on the streets by not going outside of his threshold, and so they arrested him. So I just really don't have any respect for him. I'm sorry if you do, but that's just, I'm giving you them Hotep Alkebulan version. So moving on, I want to talk about Lewis Latimer. Now, Lewis Latimer, his father, George, was an escaping slave from Virginia, and he escaped to Boston, Massachusetts to achieve his freedom, and he lived with a family in Boston. And then a few years later, his former owner tracked him down and was attempting to, reclaim his property. Just think about that, sisters and brothers, that you had escaped slavery, then somebody can come search you out and draw you back into slavery. Let's just let that sink in for a minute. And just think, if they were successful, he wouldn't have given birth to Lewis, who gives us the light bulb. Anyway, his father hooked up with William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, and they took up his case. A lawsuit was filed, and he ended up getting freed. So Lewis Latimer was born in 1848 in Massachusetts. He sold the Liberator newspaper as a youth. It was published by, of course, William Lloyd Garrison. He enlisted in the Navy during the Civil War. When he returned to Boston to get a job, he loved to paint. He loved to draw. And so he started working as an office worker. So he got a job at Crosby and Gould. That caused him to be interested in publishing poetry. He wrote poetry to his wife. Sort of like in a proposal. He lived near Alexander Graham Bell. Now, the significance of him being by Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell, I believe, came from Germany. And he was trying to invent a device where his deaf wife could hear him when he stumbled on what we now have as the telephone. But he needed the draftsman skills of Lewis Latimer, who drew up the plans for his patent so that we can now have what's called the telephone. Lewis Latimer was very, very, very profound brother. So he began to, devise his own inventions. His earliest invention was a water closet for railway cars. That's very important. You need to go to the bathroom on railway cars. He went to work for Hiram Maxim, and he became an engineer there. Then in 1880, after Edison so-called invented the lamp. Now, Edison did not invent the light bulb. It was given to him by some people from England. And, it was kind of like a novelty at first because, they would turn it on and it would only stay on for, minutes at a time. Sometimes it would go right out. And a lot of times they were using a bamboo filament in the bulb, but Lewis Latimer used a carbon filament. Carbon is what? Black. And they say what? Out of darkness comes the light. And so, by the way, I know this is a digression, but Dr. Sabi says it's not melanin, it's carbon. And so that's another thing, but something to think about. People are going, running wild on melanin, but you need to look at carbon because that is the actual chemical, the mineral rather, that makes us black, that gives us the color. So Latimer used a carbon filament, and it made it to be the long-lasting light bulb. And then he devised a way to mass manufacture it. And then he wrote the first textbook in modern times on electricity. He supervised the lighting for New York and a lot of big cities. I think I cut that off in my notes. But he supervised even in France. He went to France. He taught himself French so that he could give the instructions in French so that the streets could be lit in Paris, France. So these guys, Lewis Latimer and Granville T. Woods, were contemporaries of Edison and Westinghouse, but they were not mentioned in this movie. And I wanted to show their contribution. Now, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima wrote a book, and it's entitled. Let's see if I can get to it, Earth Mama. It's currently offline. So what I will have to do is pair it with my phone. But what I'm looking for as I do this, sisters and brothers, is, and I hopefully this doesn't annoy my host here. But what I'm showing is Dr. Ivan Van Sertima wrote a book called Blacks in Science. And in that book, Blacks in Science, let's see, let me get to my settings here. Wi-Fi. Magic of technology. Okay, so I should be able to get to my Scribd. Is it there? Come back. Yes, here it is. Blacks in Science. So here, this is kind of a cheat, but a lot of books. I actually have the physical copy of the book, but in order to give talks, and show it up on a screen, I've used this. So Dr. Ivan Van Sertima wrote Blacks in Science, Ancient and Modern. And I don't know if you can see this clearly, but, he talks about the Dogon, talks about, ancient astronomical observatories in the southern Sahara, architecture, talks about the pyramids, talks about the Great Zimbabwe Wall. In Imhotep's pyramid, they found a glider. And when it was first found, they said it was a bird. But somebody from NASA observed it and reconstructed it and flew it off a mountain, made it life-size, that a person can fly. Flew it off a mountain and it flew. So, it has things like that in the book. The Yoruba number system. It also has in here African background of medicine, African contributions to medicine, watercraft, outline of Africa's role in physics, the Akan script. What I'm wearing is Akan. It's kente, and it comes from the Akan people. And the Akan people are actually 11 different tribes. So most people are familiar with the Ashanti, but there's Fanti, there's Waso, there's 11 tribes that are associated with, and the language is similar, but it's broken up in different dialects. So when I greet you at the beginning of the program and I say Wahotase, and the response is Mahoye, that's tree or the Ashanti language. So breaks that down. Black Americans in the field of science and invention. Here, Edison, bringer of light. Black space. It looks at blacks in NASA. Now, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima used to tell this joke because he did some research on NASA, and he said there's a joke. Looks at Imhotep. He said there's a joke in NASA. He says they asked this question. They said, in what year did the Titanic sink? And the person gives the year, whatever the year it was, and then they say, okay, how many people went down on that ship? And the answer was like 1,500. They turn to the black person. They say, name them. And that's how good. It's a joke, but it's not a joke. That's how good you have to be. And so Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. So here, this is actually an article on Lewis Latimer written by our late great scholar, Dr. John Heinrich Clark. It's beautiful, and that's where that picture came from. And so he breaks down a lot of things about, and what I really like about, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima's Journal of African Civilizations, it's well referenced. You can go and look at these references that he has. It's mainly for geeky people like me who are geeked out on their culture, their civilization. Actually, if you were to meet me in person, you give me like 10 minutes, I might be giving you this presentation in person. That's how wild I am. That's how African-centered I am about our history. But Ivan Van Sertima went and looked at, African-American space, contributions in space. And he talked about this guy. He was Major Frederick Gregory, but he later became Colonel. He designed the cockpit of the space shuttle. He designed this, it's kind of like a pogo stick, like a joystick, to use it. Here's Dr. Van Sertima with now he's Colonel Gregory. He designed the cockpit. And this guy here, Isaac Gilliam, he was the person who was the chief executive of the airport. Let's see. Let me get this right. He was the highest ranking black operations officer at NASA, at Dryden's Flight Research Center, at Edwards Air Force Base in California. So this guy, he oversaw a lot of stuff. Then there was this guy, Robert Sherney. Robert Sherney designed the tires for the moon buggy on the moon. He also designed the commode for the Skylab, which, okay, you might say, well, he just designed a commode, but that's very important in a weightless condition. You don't want stuff floating around when you're in the space shuttle. So, you know, he has his drawings. This sister here designed a biofeedback process. Her name is Patricia Cowings. She designed a biofeedback so that astronauts could regulate, you know, their blood, because, you know, in a weightless condition, sometimes your blood goes all the way to your head. So there were a tremendous amount of people that were working on, you know, working in NASA. This sister is, you know, supersonic. She did a lot of heavy research in supersonics. This brother here, James Spady, this is the camera that took pictures from the moon, took pictures of the Earth from the moon. You know, and it's called the Lunar Surface Ultraviolet Camera Spectrograph. Now, I talked about this years ago, and it was, you know, there was nuclear scientists that were working on the Oppenheimer project. It's called the Oppenheimer project or the Mannheim project, whatever the name of the project, which, you know, developed the atomic bomb. There were actually black scientists that were working on those things as well, and this is one of them. And, you know, Dr. Van Sertima produces the certificate that he got from the armed services. But all of that is fine, well, and good. But what did that do for black people? What did it do for us that we designed, that an African American designed the space, the cockpit of the space shuttle, that an African American designed the tires on the moon buggy, that an African American did all of these things at NASA? How did that benefit the black community? This is the question that we need to ask. I heard Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen ask this question a long time ago, and he was talking about Benjamin Banneker. He said, if he was a black hero, what did he do for black people? You know, he died, got shot in the rectum, protecting his colonialist master against his British master. You know, so when we think of people like Colin Powell, yes, he was a great general, but was he a great general for black people? What does he do? In 2000 Seasons, it says, no one spring changes the desert. The desert remains, the spring runs dry. Not one spring, not 30 springs, not 1,000 springs will change the desert. In order to change the desert, the oceans have to come together, not to coach the desert, but to overwhelm the desert. We're talking about our creativity today. I hope that you will look at this. Some young people will look at this and say, I might be the one that develops the cure for AIDS, that develops the cure for Ebola. I might be the one that solves the transportation problem in Africa, that I will make air vehicles that are not dependent on fossil fuels. I might be the one who discovers various means of communication that we don't even know about today. So today's presentation, coming from Earth Mama Healing, is livicated, not dedicated, but livicated to the creative genius of Lewis Latimer and Granville T. Woods. May their name live long in the memory of the African people. Ashe. Uncle Job Sanev, life, prosperity, and health. Live up.